Serving in the military, you're faced with problem solving every day under extreme conditions. The men and women who serve, they have to be pragmatic and logical. But the places that they're stationed have typically seen decades, sometimes even centuries of death, suffering and fear. Some believe that all of that will leave a mark on these places. And so this collection of stories comes from people who have served in the military, their families, and re-enactors who have witnessed something. Something that, having ruled out every other conceivable possibility in their mind, leaves them with an utterly impossible, and most times unsettling, explanation. I have been really looking forward to sharing these stories with you all. I think by their very nature, places associated with the military harbour such strong energies and emotions, with, at times, extremely dark history attached to them. So I'm just going to get right into it with this first story from Rob. I'm retired from the US military. In January 1984, I arrived at RAF Bentwaters in the UK. I'd just gotten married a month before arriving at my new duty station. After a few weeks, I moved into a 2-storey row house in the town of Ipswich, about 10 miles away from the base. My wife was still in the States until I could secure a place to live before she could come. The house seemed nice, but when I cleaned the house, it never felt clean for some reason. That's never a good sign. That first deep clean, the one that earns you the first night's takeaway. Nothing more satisfying. Then you know any grime is your grime, and that makes it better than stranger grime. Once I got moved in, my wife came over and we started to set up the house. The first night she was there, we were in one of the upstairs bedrooms when we heard what sounded like someone pacing downstairs. Then, there was a sound like someone kicked a cardboard box. To hear someone pacing around is one thing, but to hear a cardboard box being kicked, that's a pretty specific sound. I went down to investigate, but nothing was disturbed. I figured since it was a row house, I may have heard someone in an adjacent house making noise, so I put it out of my mind. Totally easy to do. We could have a ghost in this house trying his damnedest to get our attention, but every single little noise gets blamed on our neighbour. Most of the time there, we spent in the bedroom. Being newlyweds, it wasn't too uncommon, but mostly because the whole house was always cold. No matter what part of the house you would be in, it was cold. We could keep that room warm with a heater. One night, again, we were in the bedroom, and the front of the house started vibrating. We live on a fairly busy street, and it wasn't uncommon for a lorry to pass by and make the same sound. But this was about 10 p.m. The street was quiet. Again, I put it out of mind. One Sunday afternoon, we went for a walk around the town centre just a few blocks away. I found a religious pamphlet on the ground and picked it up. I thought I'd read it later and shoved it into a pocket, and we carried on walking. After we got back, we took a nap. I was awake for a while and started reading the pamphlet. When I finished, I tossed it over the side of the bed and crashed out for a bit. When we got up, the pamphlet was on the other side of the bed from where I'd tossed it. Again, I put it out of mind, thinking I was sleepy and imagined things. Later, things got weirder. Lights would turn on and off by themselves. One night, when I was working an evening shift, from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m, my wife was sitting in one of the downstairs rooms alone with her back to the wall. She started talking to whatever might be in the house that we couldn't see. Suddenly, a hand touched her shoulder. After that, she wouldn't stay in the house alone. She started riding into work with me and hung out on the base until it was time for me to go home. I think that is the very definition of being careful what you wish for. Okay, she might not have wished for a handsy ghost, but I've heard quite a few stories where as soon as you acknowledge the activity, it starts getting worse. Then, everything ramped up. One night I experienced sleep paralysis. It felt as though someone was holding me down. Better yet, sitting on me. I could see, but wasn't able to turn my head. All I could see was the bedroom door standing open with a weird light in the room. I had to fight to get to move. When I finally did, I sat straight up in bed, but nothing was in the room. My wife was still sleeping. Another time, I lost my wallet inside the house. Couldn't find it anywhere I looked. I needed my military ID just to get on base, and it was in my wallet. One cold morning, I went to put on my military field jacket, and the wallet was in one of the sleeves. I didn't put it there, and neither did my wife. In one of the sleeves, though. Certainly wouldn't be your first choice for storing something like a wallet, especially with a very important military ID in. That is very weird. Then came the night that changed everything. Like I said before, the house was always cold, so we slept with a heater at the foot of the bed. My wife experienced this event. She didn't tell me about it until morning. That night, she awoke to a man standing next to her side of the bed. She described him as looking like a sea captain from the late 19th century. When she focused on the figure, it vanished. But then the ghosts of children flew up from the foot of the bed and flew into the wall right over her face, one after the other. She could see their faces as they flew past. I don't know how many there were, but I don't think she stopped to count them. Repeating this story in later years still brought tears to her eyes. Not too long after this, we applied for on-base housing, and we were able to move into base housing in Felixstowe by mid-October. Fortunately, nothing followed us. All this happened over the span of a few months, and that was enough. That was a lot. I'm totally not shocked you applied for new housing there. What? Seeing a sea captain in Ipswich is not unusual, I suppose. There is a port there, so perhaps he returned to his house as this wasn't one on base. But then why were there so many ghost kids there too? And did they have to fly over the bed face to face with Rob's wife like that? No wonder it brings her to tears. But this next story from Sam could very well bring me close to tears if I'd been the one experiencing it. Very unnerving, but also heartbreaking in a way. So I was on a deployment at an RAF base. I'm a driver, so my job over there was to drive big trucks onto the airfield and do various jobs with them. Usually this is just refueling trucks for the aircraft that land at the base, but there is a whole other list of other vehicles we drive less frequently. My tour ran throughout the winter months on this particular base, and so there's an operation called Blacktop that runs during these months. Essentially, all Operation Blacktop is keeping the runway fit for purpose. The Typhoons stationed there are the main line of defence, and if they can't take off, we lose a lot of combat capability. I would say definitely an essential part of having a runway. Don't want your planes doing their best impressions of a figure skater. But worse than that, the incoming aircraft can't land to deliver food supplies, so the mess gets bad really quickly. Fortunately, I was armed with the biggest snowplow you'd ever seen and really thick socks, so it was easy to stay on top of the job. Unfortunately, this means that if a snowstorm hits at 3 AM, which they often did, we have to get the woolies on and start driving these monsters up and down the airfield. It's almost like snowstorms know what's the most inconvenient time to hit. So fun fact, it turns out you can't just drive trucks onto an airfield because apparently you might collide with an aircraft or some nonsense, and there's actually a whole procedure behind it. I take a radio with me, park my truck at the edge of the airfield, and then radio the air traffic control tower to check that everything is safe first. Sometimes they give you permission, and sometimes they tell you to wait until it's clear. Now, the tower usually closes around 5 PM and everyone goes home. However, the procedure doesn't really change. The reason for that is that if an aircraft has unexpectedly been diverted to us, or for whatever reason something needs to reach us in an emergency, the ATC tower can get a hold of us and warn us that an aircraft has intentions to land where we're driving. As a result, at night we're radioing the tower and not expecting a response. Can you guess what's going to happen? You know what, Sam? I have a bit of an inkling where this is going to go. Anyway, long story short, working the night shift when a big storm hits at 3 AM. There's a team of 4 of us, but only one working snowplow, so I grab my thermos and decide to let the other guys finish the movie they're watching and plough the runway on my own. I drive to the entry point to the airfield, look at the tower, lights are off. I pick up the radio. Tower, this is the code name that I am right now making up for Sam's story. Snowplow Sam. I intend to transition onto the airfield to perform snow clearing duties. I will report when vacated. I don't bother waiting for a response and just start driving out into the storm. When my radio crackles, I slam on the brakes and pick the radio back up. Ooh, the smell of adrenaline in that snowplow right now. All I hear is a sort of monotone drone, and it's 30 seconds or so before the line is clear to make a response. Unknown call sign, this is Snowplow Sam. Say again, I didn't catch that. Again, a monotone drone. Unknown call sign, Snowplow Sam. Again, nothing heard. Tower, this is Snowplow Sam. If you're trying to contact me to let me know airfield is unsafe, send me a light signal from the tower or beep my radio. It's hard to see the tower due to the storm, but there's also zero light pollution, so any light from ATC would stick out like, well, a lighthouse. The monotone drone continues for 30 or more seconds. Tower, Snowplow Sam will continue onto the airfield to perform duties. Unknown call sign, you're still unreadable. It might be the storm. I will try to pick up comms intermittently. Still droning. So I drive out and begin to clear the runway. As I get further down, I radio the unknown call sign. As I get closer to the other end of the airfield, I realise that the signal is getting stronger. I still can't make out what they're saying, but I decide to stop at the furthest end of the runway and try to make comms there before I turn around. Unknown call sign, this is Snowplow Sam. Can you repeat the message you're trying to relay? They radio back clearly this time, but I still can't understand them. It's like they're speaking a foreign language. Unknown call sign, really sorry about this, but can you say again? Weirdly, it clicked what I'd just heard just as I spoke the message, and I knew what I was about to hear back before it actually came through. The person on the radio was sobbing. Not wailing or screaming, but very gently sobbing down the radio to me for about 30 seconds each time. These radios have around a 2K range on a good day, and here I was in a storm that would literally kill a person stuck outside in 20 minutes, 5 kilometres up an empty stretch of runway. I dropped the radio procedures here. Hey, are you okay? Yeah, to your mind, you're hearing another person crying like that. I think I would do the same. Make sure they're okay. I was never able to get hold of them again. I was more confused at this stage than anything, so I just finished the job and headed back. It was only later that I realised how absurd the situation was. I figured it could have been the army messing with me, but even the paras wouldn't have been out in that storm, and they would have had to have been pretty close to our building to get within radio range. If they were, we would have been told, because we would have needed to do welfare checks on them throughout the night. If it was my own colleagues messing with me, I definitely would have heard about it when I got back. Yeah, to go to that sort of effort to creep you out like that, you are not going to live that one down when you get back in. I decided not to report it because a lot of the older guys were old enough to serve in the war, and I figured I might get filled in for telling spooky stories in an area where their mates might have died. I think that is a good call, but that meant that no one took responsibility for messing with you, not even a smirk when you got back inside. The person sobbing was never identified, and they would have had to have been within range to be picked up on the radio in a snowstorm. Wow. I can just only imagine the range of emotions that you went through from that job though. You first start hearing weird things, which I can imagine is more terrifying in the moment than if it was just a straight up ghost story, because you're playing with big toys that could mean life or death if some technology fails or there's a miscommunication. So you go through that, but then that adrenaline turns to pure confusion, unease, concern at hearing those sobs, and then probably back to confusion again when you don't figure out what it actually was. That is a very weird thing. But someone else who went through that sort of confusion, that sort of, what on earth did I hear, was Christopher in this next story. In the early 2000s, I was a young airman based on an RAF base in the south of England. The base dates from between the World Wars, and our squadron operated out of a 1930s C-type hangar. One of my duties as being at the bottom of the food chain was locking up the hangar at the end of the night when the work was done. It was a summer night in the early 2000s at about 2 AM, when the last of the aircraft were put to bed and everyone else went home, leaving me alone to lock up. That can either go one of two ways though, can't it? It can either feel really peaceful, just being alone to get the job done, or mildly disconcerting. Having worked in the very small hours of the morning on a barn with absolutely no one else around other than the horses who wouldn't give a stuff if I lived or died, I have felt that spectrum of emotions. The hangar was a large open space in the middle for the aircraft with 2 mezzanine floors on either side with various offices, etc. I secured the far side of the hangar and made my way across the open area, accompanied by the usual clicks and clanks of aircraft and equipment settling for the night, along with a gentle breeze coming through a gap in the main doors. Footsteps echoing off the concrete floor, I switched the light off and made my way upstairs to the aircrew officers on the flight side, namely the side by the dispersal. As I made my way upstairs, I passed the wing commander's office, his second-in-commands, and various other offices. I was then walking towards the aircrew briefing room when I heard something. I can only describe it as the sound you hear when a group of people are in a room talking. No words are discernible, just the hum of voices. This was coming from the briefing room. Yeah, there's just no way that you can explain that one away as aircraft metal contracting or your own footsteps echoing, can you? My first thought was that maybe no one had told us that there was night flying. Maybe an operation was on that we knew nothing of. I was a little bit annoyed as I just wanted to go to bed, so I approached the door to see what was going on. At the exact moment my hand touched the handle, the noises stopped. I opened the door to a silent, empty, and pitch-black room. I've never been able to explain this. This was not the sort of thing one admitted to experiencing in that line of work, so I kept it to myself. However, it has come to light that a similar experience happened in one of the other hangars at the base. I can see why it's not just something that you would want to hold your hands up and say that you experienced. When you're already at the bottom of the pecking order, no need to make life more difficult for yourself. Could it have been someone just on the outside of the hangar on that side? But what a heck of a coincidence for the multiple voices to just abruptly stop as soon as you put your hand on the door handle. That is weird. And this next story just shows that you don't need to be out alone in the early hours of the morning for things to get weird. Schwabach, in what was then West Germany, is still in Bavaria and is not far from Nuremberg. I was born into a US military family. We lived all over the continental US and Europe as part of my father's career. When we lived in Germany, we spent 2 years in military housing, but the twist is, it was actually housing that had been built by the Third Reich. The housing we had was apparently officers' housing, and it was actually quite nice. Now that is certainly some history you're living in there. 2 stairwells per building, a storage space for each apartment in the basement, along with a large laundry room, and a large room strung with wires to hang clothes to dry. In the attic was a large, all-purpose room that residents could use for parties or other gatherings. I attended a Girl Scout sleepover in one such room, for example. Also in the attic was a bathroom and a maid's room for each apartment. The rooms were just big enough for a single bed and a trunk, or small dresser, and presumably all the women who lived there shared the one bathroom. At the end of the hallway, where the maids' quarters were, there was a door that went into the corridor of the next stairwell. The stairwells were inverse of each other as far as the layout. The other thing to know is that due to the way the military does or did things, my father was the stairwell coordinator because he was the highest ranking military member in the stairwell. The building coordinator lived in the other stairwell and he outranked my father. What these coordinators did was handle any complaints or problems or issues between neighbours and maintenance needs and so on. Our apartment was on the 2nd floor, with an apartment above, one below, one across the hall, and one wall shared with the opposite design apartment in the other stairwell. From the time we moved in, we could hear thumping footsteps from the upstairs apartment, always late at night. We didn't think much of it. The upstairs neighbours had kids, and kids can be loud. It honestly sounded like kids running. The only time I've lived in an apartment was in the first year of university in student halls, and it is wild how much you can hear of your neighbours. We didn't know until much later that the neighbours upstairs heard slamming doors from our apartment very regularly. They complained about it. My father told them we weren't slamming doors, but they insisted they heard it. My father pointed out that their kids were always running and thumping on the floors, and they denied that. Neither of us could hear what the other could, so the phenomenon was weirdly encapsulated. Eventually, we ended up in a position where there was no one upstairs, no one downstairs, no one across the hall, but the footsteps persisted. I started to notice that it was always in a pattern, always around the same time of day, or rather night, around 11 p.m. When a friend came and spent the night, she heard it and said, "Oh, did you get new neighbours already?" I had to tell her that no, there was no one living upstairs, which freaked her out a little. On another occasion, all the men in the building were away on military exercise. One of the women from the other stairwell came over to talk to my mother about something that was going on. She said that she kept hearing someone knock on her door, but when she'd check, there'd be no one there. She was unnerved by it, especially with her husband away. It happened quite regularly, and if I'm recalling correctly, it was around the same time of night when it would happen. She did not believe that anyone could knock and run down the stairs quickly enough to not be seen, and I agree with that. The construction of the building made that basically impossible. But she thought that maybe someone was coming across from the hallway upstairs, the one by the maid's quarters, and down to the apartment to knock, and then somehow dash upstairs before they were seen. She was pretty much convinced that she was being pranked and wanted to get to the bottom of it. My mother came up with the idea to sprinkle a fine dusting of powder on the floor upstairs in the connecting hallways to catch any footprints and test the theory. So they did that. Love that, getting technical with it. It didn't help. I don't think there was ever a resolution to this issue. Personally, I believe it was the same as the thumping footsteps and the slamming doors and who knows what else that nobody mentioned because they just didn't think much of it. But the worst was the basement. Why is the worst always the basement? My mother did most of the laundry, but as I got older, she would send me down to move things to the dryer or to collect the dry clothes from the washer. I was very creeped out in the basement. Years later, I found out that she was too, and it was part of why she would send me down. She didn't like to be in the basement, especially at night. She had no idea that I, too, was aware of what very much felt like a presence in the basement. Sorry, but that is absolutely hilarious though, sending your kid down into the scary basement so the ghost gets them, rather than you. Love that survival instinct, Mum. Now I need to make it clear that I'm not a psychic medium or anything like that. I am quite intuitive though, and very empathetic. And I've had many experiences with places or even objects where I just got a picture in my head or an awareness of something strange or just a strong, unshakable vibe about something. That basement was one of those places. I felt very strongly that I was being watched from a particular doorway that went into the other basement room. I had the impression of a young woman in what seemed to be an early 20th century servant's uniform. Very plain, just a simple knee-length dress with short sleeves, an apron and a headscarf. I can't say what colour, but it was something modest and dull, like a beige or a dusty blue or similar. This was just a strong, unshakable image in my mind, not something I ever saw with my eyes. It wasn't an apparition or anything like that. It was just a presence that never moved or communicated in any way other than, I suppose, its presence and its sadness. That's the only thing I remember very well. The presence was extremely sad. Makes you wonder what could have happened for that to be what was left behind. I believe now that all of these things were purely residual. Some may have been from the time that there were literal Nazis living in the building, the maid, for example. The rest could be from anywhere and any time, really, as the buildings were occupied for decades by American military families after World War II. But the last I knew, those particular housing units were still in use, so I had a look on Google Street View, and they seem to have been remodelled somewhat, but are still there, and people still live in them. I hope for the sake of the people who live there now that whatever changes were made to the building in that housing, it settled the echoes of the past. It very well could have, or might have made it worse. You hear stories of it going both ways, but other hauntings that can go well, or really, really badly, are down to completely different reasons. This story from a military reenactor, Paul, may give a clue as to who or what could be haunting this old fort. An Englishman who's been living in America for many years. I've been reenacting the American Revolution for over 30 years. This is a story that happened at the very start of my career. One of the first events was a living history event at Fort Frederick, Maryland, a stone-walled fort in western Maryland. It is in general a square shape with high stone walls and one gate in the middle. The fort has a bastion in each corner and two two-storey clapboard barracks buildings running the length of the parade ground. The fort was to protect Maryland from the French in the 1750s, but the only time it ever saw a shot fired in anger was during the American Civil War, as Confederate troops were on their way to Gettysburg. The big moment in the fort's life was when it was used as a prisoner of war camp for the British troops, when they surrendered after Yorktown in 1781. Stick a pin in this point. Consider that pin stuck. That is going to be a horrendous time for all imprisoned, I'm going to imagine. We arrived early Friday and set up in barracks buildings and kitchens. The site had no running water or electricity within the walls, so we were going to live the life as Georgian soldiers. Meals cooked in open hearths and primitive mattresses on bunks. Oh, I do love that though. That is the proper way to reenact. Authentic. As we settled in for the evening, I decided I wanted to go and look out over the walls. There was just one section where they rebuilt the parapet for the walls, but there were stairs up to it in the alley behind our barracks, a space about 10 feet wide behind the barracks and the fort wall. As I stepped into the alley from the northern end, where the stairs were, there was suddenly a feeling of intense malevolence coming from the far end of the alleyway. When you can just feel that I am absolutely not supposed to be in here and something is about to drive that point right home, yeah, absolutely not. I backed up, stepped out of the alleyway into the parade ground and nothing. I crossed to look behind the other barracks. Maybe it was just the blank walls of the barracks and the stone wall hemming me in. Nope, no problem from the other side. Stepped into the other alley and nada, nothing. I went back to the first one to go up the stairs, and there it was again. That feeling of intense malevolence from the bastion to the right of the fort gate. I stepped forward, determined to do what I had planned to do. I was not going to be scared off by a funny feeling. I stepped onto the steps, and the feeling disappeared. Well, good for you. I went up, looked out over the walls at the beautiful night, and was glad I'd done so. But as I went back down, again from that far bastion, hatred. I went back out and went into the barracks room and decided not to tell anyone. I was the new boy, and if I said I thought that there were ghosts, that I could just see it. Endless teasing, branches dragged across my tent. So I just kept quiet. Saturday was crisp and wonderful, with just a little snow as we posted guards, drilled, and talked to visitors to the site about the life of a soldier in the mid-1700s. I even ventured into the bastion in daylight, and it was fine. That night, with visitors gone and the place locked up, after dinner I went out to look over the wall again, and suddenly the feeling was back. Worse than the night before. F*** it, I went back inside the barracks. I can respect that though. You're not going to let whatever it was win, but also, if it's now pulling out all the stops to make sure that you're not going to go back into that alley, maybe smart to call it a day and quit while you're ahead. Some guys climbed into bunks, others of us sat up, doing what I suspect soldiers have done since before Rome. Repaired kit, drank beer, and talked about sports, politics, and women. It's the moments that make reenacting really special, when you feel like you're really seeing what it was like centuries ago. Then the door to the barracks room flew open. One of the officers came in, slammed it behind him, looked at us and declared, "I just had the freakiest experience." He then proceeded to describe an experience almost identical to mine. And as he talked, it loosened tongues. Of the 20 of us there, 12 of us had had the same experience, and until that officer had come in, no one had wanted to say anything. My feelings, alone in the alleyway, had been subjective. Now, with different people reporting it, it became objective. I mean, yeah, I really think that at that point, you may start to look outside the possibility that it was just a, quote, funny feeling, right? For 12 men to encounter the exact same thing. Sunday, we had another good day of helping visitors, and then we all cleared out. The parks people had said that we were welcome to stay until Monday if we wanted to, but after the story was out, no one was staying a third night in that place. Now, several months later, I got a little more information about the place. We portray a Welsh regiment, and historically, the Welsh and Scots could not be put next to each other. But as reenactors, we got on very well with a couple of the Highland groups. After another event, we were cleaning up our camp, and a woman with a Scottish regiment asked what sites we'd been to during the year. I told her the various spots, and then when I got to Fort Frederick, she suddenly got very excited. "What did you think of it?" I was not going to say that it gave us the screaming memes. Screaming memes, I have never heard that before, I'm using that. So I just said, we didn't like the atmosphere. "Oh, go on," she said. "He's a friendly ghost." "Excuse me, ma'am, what? In what world is stepping into pure malevolence and hatred now considered friendly?" That let the cat out of the bag, and I asked her what experiences they had had. She said several people had felt something following them. Something curious and helpful. No one had been bothered by it. I merely said, we had a less happy experience. Here's what I think. Remember, the fort was used to house POWs after Yorktown. There were 3 Highland regiments surrendered there. My take is, whatever is there was someone from one of those 3 regiments. He had the traditional dislike for Welsh soldiers, but saw the Highlander reenactors as kindred spirits. Other groups go there, and the story has seeped out to the community, so anyone who feels odd might put it down to having heard the stories. But when we were there, 30 plus years ago, it was something people hadn't heard about, and it was completely objective. What an interesting detail, though, that 2 groups representing 2 different countries that have some attached history to the place would have completely different experiences based on who they were reenacting. But this next one isn't necessarily your typical run-of-the-mill haunting in the context of the paranormal and it being so rare that a huge portion of us don't even believe it exists. But even so, this weirdness could be enough to leave you more than a little bit uneasy, like reenactor Danny. Many moons ago, in my early years as a reenactor, I had a possible time slip experience. It would have been roughly 2003, and I was a Lance bombardier in the World War II display team based in Chelmsford. Due to the rig we had, a World War II Morris quad, a limber, and a 25 PDR, we had to travel on side roads and at night. I can see how travelling with a big old setup like that, you would probably have to keep off the M25 during rush hour. We were travelling through Chelmsford, scooting around Molsham Street and up to Broomfield and heading towards Colchester. You see, the vehicle towing was very noisy, and for safety, we had a flashing orange beacon. We were all in World War II uniform and standing up out on the roof, when we hit this one particular road. It was double width, just still a normal road, but the first odd thing was that there were no road markings. As the rig entered the road, the flashing beacon stopped, and all sounds around us stopped. There was nothing modern in sight. No aircraft, no modern road signs. All we had was us in uniform, the noise of the rig moving, and the drag links clanking away. I remember looking down to see the driver and front passenger being lit up by the dull wartime dashboard light. But this went on for about half an hour. We got to the end of the road and joined a B road. The flashing beacon started, cars speeding past and aircraft from nearby Stansted Airport. Could never figure it out. Also, I like to add over the years, I've been around many World War II vehicles and equipment. In certain light, these vehicles can look very eerie and supernatural. That is... yeah. For the beacon to stop, for nothing modern to appear on the side of the road, for half an hour, no less. I know it gets a bit rural out that way, but surely not to that extent. For not even a single car to pass you or anything. That is strange. I wonder if any of the other guys noticed what was going on too. But yeah, it's almost like the vehicle took you right back in time. Wow. But thank you to Rob, Sam, Christopher, Paul, Danny, and the anonymous listener for sending in their stories. I could honestly listen to military ghost stories all day. They are one of my favourite episodes to put together the history for anyway, when I cover a castle or an RAF station or anything like that. But if you have your own story, whether it's from your time in the military, living in or near a barracks, as a reenactor, or even if it's got nothing to do with the military at all, I would absolutely love to hear about it. There were quite a few instances in these stories where I anonymised details as requested, so please don't let that put you off if you would like to share. So please email me your story at hello@don'tscareclaire.com or use the form pinned in the comments section. I cannot wait to hear from you. But anyway, if you enjoyed this collection of stories as told to me by the real people who experienced them, then please do give the video a like, and if you enjoy hearing stories like this, make sure that you subscribe. I chat about the history behind the mystery as well as first-hand witness accounts every single week. But that is all from me today. Go and get a drink of water, stay hydrated as we head into what constitutes as our summer here in the UK. I cannot wait to chat with you more about the morbid, mysterious and macabre. So until next time, sleep safe. I didn't realise until today that I've been walking around with a massive hole in my trousers. How have I even done that?